Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to all of you who have joined or are joining at the moment. My name is Joseph de Cruz, and I'm a member of the Board of Directors of Climate Governance Malaysia and also the CEO of the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil. We're here this morning for a CGM Roundtable on communicating sustainability in the palm oil sector amid evolving expectations. And we have a really cool panel of colleagues here who are going to dive into a conversation around the challenges we face with communicating both the progress as well as the reality of the palm sector, which, as all of you know, is a pivotal sector in the economy and the political economy of Malaysia, as well as the broader region. So we have an hour and a half, which we're going to use both to have an initial conversation amongst our panelists, and then hopefully also bring all of you in from the audience with your own questions, which you can either type into the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen if you haven't used Zoom before, or also you may enter it into the webinar chat if you prefer. Our team will keep an eye on those questions, and once we get past the initial round of the conversation, I'll pull out some of these questions to try and inform where we move forward. Now, we have a wonderful panel here, and I'm going to introduce each of them briefly without going into too much detail since they're all fairly well known. So pleased to have with us all the way live from London, Izzana Salleh, who leads the Council of Oil Palm Producing Countries, which is the intergovernmental grower organization for the palm industry worldwide. Izzana is based in Jakarta and is joining us here live. We also have Farhana Jabir from PwC Malaysia. Farhana is the director of the PwC practice, focusing very much on sustainability and has done some interesting work recently on the palm sector. From the downstream industry, we have Raja Nurmaria Murni from Nestle, who will be able to give us a perspective on how global brands and consumers look at the palm industry and the products that we produce. And last but certainly not least, we have Ku Kok Peng, Chief Sustainability Officer at Kepong, who is also on the board of RSPO, as well as being on the advisory board of the Malaysian Palm Oil Association. So colleagues, a very warm welcome to all of you. Now, as we discussed, I want to start off with a broad question to each of you in turn. And the question is the same, which is that we all know the palm industry has made tremendous progress on sustainability over the last couple of decades. So why do we struggle to communicate what has been accomplished, and what can we do better? So Izzana, let me kick off with you. What do you think?
Thanks so much, JD. I appreciate the chance to be here with so many esteemed panelists that I really look up to. I love that you're starting with this communication gap conversation, because that sort of sets the tone. And we all know that palm oil industry has made real progress over the past decade or two. Sustainability, certification, traceability, inclusivity, all key components of what the industry is really looking at. But global perception does not seem to have caught up. I'm here in London, where at Argos, speaking on some of the sustainable aviation fuel conversation, and it was a tough conversation that I had to have, and I had a lot of pushback, I'll be very honest with you. And that's because the old narratives linger, and new progress often get lost in the technical or fragmented messages. So the challenge isn't the lack of action, but it's that our story is a bit scattered, and it's told in isolation. Whereas actually, if we all band together and our messaging is compounded, it becomes loud, basically pooling our resources, aligning things, and really amplifying the same message out to the world. So that's kind of where we at CPOPC, I've stepped into the role June this year. I really hope that that's the role that we can play. We operate at an international layer, connecting national certification systems like MSPO, ISPO, RSPO, and wherever we go, we try to make sure that the world recognizes all of you as, of course, the credible science-based sustainability frameworks that you are. And for us, what we're trying to do is in a lot of the multilateral spaces, for example, at the UN ECOSOC, where we spoke earlier middle of this year, the high-level political forum, and last week we were at World Bank IMF annual meetings. We, for the first time, World Bank, through our cooperation, spoke about palm oil and Plantation 360, the entire ecosystem. And so we want to be in places where palm oil used to be absent, or how we can all be there together so that we're loud, we're compounded, and the new data, the data that is of 2025, is present in all of these markets. So our role is, we want to make it simple. We want to make sure that there's national trust, compliance are reflected in global visibility and credibility.
Wonderful. Thanks, Izzana. I love that you started with the fact that old narratives linger, because I think that's one of the things in this sector that's always puzzled me a bit. In a world where we see communications, media, stories, memes, moving at such a rapid pace, and for some strange reason, we still have an industry where narratives from 20 years ago still lurk in the corners. I'm glad you managed to make it out of the SAF conversation without having stuff thrown at you, but you certainly see
Almost.
but you certainly see the challenge we face, that we really are
Absolutely.
dealing with these old narratives, and we need to
In
find a
in
way to
fact,
pass it.
if I
Yeah,
may share a quick anecdote,
yeah,
during the dry run with speakers, and let's be frank about these things. When I came in, because palm oil is in our council name, immediately there was another panelist who said, "Look, palm oil is a taboo here." And I said, "Well, I said, allow me the space, and we can have a discourse about it. Life and data is about having discussed those tough conversations. Give me that 5 minutes on stage, and I'll prove you wrong."
wonderful. And
And
I'm
so
sure
the
exactly that. Farhana, let's shift a little bit. You do a lot of work at PwC around the palm sector. And I guess you're one of the people here who's not kind of in the firing line by being in an organization that is seen as a palm sector industry, but you're very much still an expert, an analyst, a thinker around the industry. So, same question to you on the communications issue. What are we doing wrong? What can we do better?
And I think a lot of it are really perception by third parties, not within the region, that have that kind of mindset that palm is dirty. And then there's also a protectionism mindset. I mean, we protect our industry, and I think it's fair to say that certain industry players also wants to protect their industry, right? And it doesn't help that when it comes to some of these reporting and communication, it's all very fragmented. And because it's all very fragmented, no one is doing it in the similar manner. So you get different information from different organization. And sometimes, because it's quite fragmented, I come from a financial audit background. I've gone through the motion of every single numbers must be proven, every single data must go through the rigor. So when I first started on sustainability reporting, it's a bit a culture shock for me. Not that the data are not reliable, but the way, the structure of how this communicated are very different than what I'm used to. So one good example is that when you want to report a profit before tax, you go through every single layers in the organization, because this is a very important document, right? But when it comes to, okay, how do we report our greenhouse gas emission? How do we report some of these no deforestation initiative? And what I see, a lot of it are driven by a third parties that write the narrative, and then the board of directors only look at it towards the end when they want to issue the report. And I think this is where a lot of problems start to come in. This is where the risk of greenwashing will come. And this is where you do not have the sufficient time to actually make sure the data is reliable. And then when you have a lot of different people doing the same thing, and then you're at a position where there's a lot of doubt over the reliability of this data. And I think our regulators are very well aware of it. And I know it's painful right now, even for us, but if we can get into the same room and in the same page as it for the industry, this is what's important, and this is how we are doing it. And you start to see consistency in how this being addressed. And I speak with quite a lot of palm players. It's the same thing. It's everyone are very well versed in what they are doing. So how do we then collectively do it well? And then you get a collective purview at the national level.
Yeah. Thanks, Farhana. A number of interesting things there, particularly the point you made about sustainability data. I think you're right, and I'm sure Ku will have something to say about this later on as well. But the process our current best practice around collecting this data, being able to present it with rigor and credibility, definitely we're still far behind where the financial disclosures are, but we're moving in the right direction. And I will want to come back to you later, I think, Farhana, around that question of, well, what data is important if you're going to tell a compelling story about palm? What are the data points that we should really be focusing on collectively as an industry to bring the narrative together instead of a scattered story, as Izzana said. But then also, and I think this is something cool we can talk about later, what are the limitations of a data-based approach? To some extent, is data sufficient now to be able to shape attitudes, perceptions, to deal with all prejudices? Or are we dealing in a consumer and brand space right now where those are much more subjective and kind of, as you said, emotion-based, potentially even protectionist-based? And so moving on to talking about precisely the brand perception and the challenge of dealing with consumers who think that palm oil is taboo. Murni, over to you. What do you think?
Yeah, so my background is mainly consumer communications for the longest time. And, I've been in this role for about a year now, and it's balancing the corporate communications and the consumer communications. So I do see both sides now. And, when it comes to corporate communications, we're reporting for compliance, for our stakeholders, for our shareholders. But when it comes to consumer communications, it's beyond the metrics. They don't understand the metrics. They don't understand the abbreviations. They don't understand the logos, and what we have on our communication materials like packaging and stuff like that. Sometimes these things go over their heads. So it's very important to go down to that human stories, like what you mentioned just now, the emotional stories, and that something that the general consumers would understand, would resonate with. And that's why, we do have this framework called the Creating Shared Value framework, or the philosophy, where, we show the impact of our actions. So it's more of communicating on impact of what we do. Of course, data, it has to be data driven, backed by auditable data. So, but more in terms of how we position that stories to the consumers, how we improve their lives, improve the lives of the communities within the value chain, the environment, and so on and so forth. So I think that's why because they're quite, these stories, when people do some of the reporting, I think some bodies do some of the reporting, it actually touches those emotions of this consumer and those anger. I think from 20 years ago, I think you remember the orangutan story, and of course we were affected by it as well. So these kind of stories bring up this kind of emotion. So we need to start communicating positively on the impact that we do with sustainability, with traceability. What does it mean to them? How does it improve the lives of the farmers, the smallholders, and so on and so forth?
Oof. Talking about touching on emotions, I think one of the things I heard most strongly in this industry when I became a part of it was the frustration, almost the anger that many of our growers feel, because they know all the effort that's been made on the ground to make things better, to improve performance, not just from an environmental point of view, but from a livelihoods point of view, from a social point of view. And yet, would it be fair to say sometimes the growers feel a little bit unappreciated in this regard? And I guess that's the question to ask you as well, is, how do we get past that? How do we actually get past these sentiments and emotions from 20 years ago and be able to tell a different story? So very specifically also, what do you think we can do better to get past this problem?
I think it's an understatement to say that we are unappreciated. I think probably the right term to use is that we are under a sustainability siege. And it's been going on for the last 20 over years. Yeah. And, we thought that certification would come and it will go away. It didn't. We thought disclosure would come and it will go away. It did not. In fact, I almost akin our sustainability report to be a very important document that nobody seems to read, right? So, I mean, having disclosure, having certification by itself is not enough. I think we need to go beyond that and communicate what has come out of those certification and disclosures. So case in point is, I would say palm certifications are not like no other. And the evidence is very clear. Malaysia's deforestation rate has declined by 57% between the periods of 2015, 2017 compared to 2020 and 2022. And it's not the palm industry that put that out. It is the WRI in 2023. So when you contrast that with what the soy industry is doing, and I'll be pretty blunt about it. It is the soy that we're comparing with. Brazil has deforested by about 6 million hectares between 2020 and 2023. And there's not even a peep that they said about it. I think the reality is that the combination of RSPO, ISCC, MSPO, ISPO, and all that has really had the impact of bringing NDPE very much to a halt, right? But that story isn't going out. So that's my first point. The second point is, while these good stories are not going out, from a grower perspective, we really caution the market and the manufacturers to be not too enamored with new buzzwords, right? And I'll give an example of one that is very in at the moment, which is regenerative agriculture. Now, I think regenerative agriculture is not a bad thing, right? And if it's left to be managed on a B2B basis, that's perfectly fine. You want to go regen ag, you want to go organic, and you have a market for it, and you allow the growers to recover the cost of it, perfect, go ahead. But I think what is very dangerous is that phenomenon is then, cascaded to the entire industry as a norm. I think that is where the danger is. Because the reality is through certification, and if we just use the RSPO as the benchmark, and you compare the RSPO indicators to the Regen Ag indicators, and take, for example, you take one of the multinational one, which is very robust. And we did an in-house exercise, and 90% of the RSPO indicators are aligned to the Regen Ag indicators. So the only major kind of divergence really is in terms of intercropping and multi-cropping, which I would argue doesn't apply to palm oil and industrial palm oil plantation, right? So if you take that out, really, RSPO indicators are compliant with Regen Ag. As much as Regen Ag makes a whole story around soil health, if you look at the RSPO carefully, soil health is very, very important, because without soil health, we can't talk about yield. Yeah. So that's the word of caution, because if we go down that route, impose it on the entire industry, there's nothing really new there. So I'll call it as almost old wine in new packaging or new bottle, right? And I doubt there will be any premium, because even certification premiums are declining. RSPO numbers shows that 60% of CSPOs are taken out. The remaining 40% are sold as conventional. So that's a lot of cost that's gone down the drain that is, not accounted for. So I think this word of caution is very important. So that's point number 2. Point number 3 comes into the communication part of it. I think for a long time, we have taken a very defensive position. So like in a good football match, you must have both the offense and defense. And I think we are not particularly strong on the offense side of it. And the other point really is that we've been going down on the facts route. And I think when it comes to communication, facts in itself doesn't work very well. I just wonder aloud, when will we see the palm oil industry coming out with its own Got Milk campaign? If you all recall the Got Milk campaign that really got people hyped up about drinking milk that was declining. And I think one of the campaign illustrated what happens when you run out of milk. So not trying to be a creative, but what about if we get onto a palm oil, get it, right? And it's dual speak, get it because you should have it, and get it because I get it, that it is sustainable, right? So I think we have to try to shift the narrative from one that is fact. The fact is the bedrock of it, but it needs to be layered with emotions as well. So those are my 3 points. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ku. And for those listening in, as a point of reference, Ku, you mentioned just now deforestation in linked to soy in the Amazon region in Latin America is 6 million hectares from 2020 to 2023, roughly. That's more than the entire planted hectare of palm in the whole of Malaysia.
Yes.
In the space of basically much less than 5 years. So yeah, you're right that the disconnect between perception, the palm is taboo response that Izzana got when she walked into the Argus conference versus the reality of where things like deforestation are actually happening. That's profound. And absolutely, I think the point you made about communication is a key one. And Izzana, I'm going to circle back to you on that because you're very much a communications whiz. And coming into this industry, I'd love to hear your perspective on how we can do better or do differently. But I also wanted to pick up on another point, which I'm going to throw back to the four of you now to dwell on. A couple of you talked about this question of disclosure regulation, the wide array of different platforms we have in the industry already, overlaid now with more sort of multi-industry, industry sector-wide, economy-wide requirements, like the things that Securities Commission and others bring in, or regulations from the European Union that not only cover agricultural commodities, but in many cases cover other types of industries as well, around corporate due diligence, carbon, etc. So I guess the question that I'm curious about here is, on the one hand, these are an admitted burden on producers. But on the other hand, as you start to see regulations that are not just industry specific, but that are being applied across the board, like the infamous EUDR, which also applies to soy and others, does that give us the opportunity then to be judged on a more level playing field? Because we are being assessed against the same criteria as everybody else. So I guess there's a two sides to that coin there. In some respects, are we over-regulated? Are we over-disclosed? Are we overburdened? But on the other hand, could these regulations that come in at a global level actually give us a fairer playing field on which to act? But Izzana, maybe on both of those, the communicating differently, but also your perspective, having seen what's going on with regulation, what do you think?
Thanks for the question. I'm not sure my communication whiz. Appreciate that. But going back to your question, I think across ministries, companies, certification bodies, we tend to speak separately, and sometimes we send a bit of mixed signals. So the result is a bit of duplication and sometimes confusion from audiences who hear different versions of maybe the same story. And what we need is to connect voluntary actions with national commitments so that they reinforce one another. And perhaps what we could do is maybe move in two directions. One is the national coherence, where there's a dialogue amongst ministry, industries, certification bodies to link the voluntary sustainability actions, NDPE, traceability, smallholder inclusion with the national climate and, say, SDG targets, but also the international amplification, where we can bring those linkages to the global space, so that the achievements and all that we've mentioned earlier, MSPO, ISPO, RSPO, is seen as part of the producing countries' contributions to, say, the Paris Agreement and SDGs. So I guess a bit of transparency with strategy and telling our stories in ways that are evidence-based. But a very important point that Ku mentioned, it's got to not just be evidence-based. It's not just data, but it's got to be emotionally resonant, right? That is the language of today, whether we like it or not. So a got milk version of 2025 for the palm oil industry would be pretty amazing. And the public must see that this is not about defending an industry. Once they feel it, that certain sense of defensiveness, they don't listen anymore. It's just the psychology of the mind, right? But it's about driving real change in livelihoods, nature, climate, which is not only because it is the conversation of today, but also because it's a very important value to the DNA of those in this generation.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the equivalent of the Got Milk campaign for the palm industry would be a wonderful thing to have. But as you rightly said, I think the value of a communications approach like that is not being defensive, but actually telling a different story, telling a more compelling story. Farhana, maybe I'll come to you also on that question of disclosure, because I know you guys get scolded a lot about the plethora of disclosure requirements that the industry and regulators and others saddle on the industry. And Kevin, I know it's not your fault. It's just that PwC works with a lot of companies on this, so you hear this a lot.
Yeah.
But one point I asked about on, whether as we move towards things that are disclosure requirements, for instance, that are economy-wide in Malaysia, the kind of stuff that Bursa is doing, for instance, or whether we move towards global regulations, market regulations, the EU, that actually apply across different commodities, does that maybe give us a more equal playing field on which to tell the story of the palm industry?
Yeah. So now this is an interesting area when it comes to disclosure, and I think there's quite a lot of confusion in the market because at the same time you have standards that are very performance based. That means you have to do X, 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 and for you to achieve this certification, to meet this particular requirement. But the disclosure requirement that the regulators are pushing are not about you have to meet a certain performance, but it's more about if you do it, you have to tell the story. So it, in a way, force people to think that, hey, actually I'm doing quite a lot. How do I tell this story in the confines of the disclosure requirement? So in the process of advising client to actually report this ISSB standard, for example, it was never the disclosure driving the business. It is always we go back to the client and ask, so what have you done and what you have done well? And how does that link to what your stakeholders are asking? And what they are asking for palm is more or less the same thing. They want to know how you deal with NDPE, they want to know deforestation, traceability, and it's across. So how do we then communicate what you've done well? And I think that's the mindset that we need to work on. And I think over the next few years, you start to see people that are doing this fairly well. And interestingly, we are not the only country or the industries that are facing this. And if you look at the EU, they also have to comply with EUDR. But the big players, they also have to report under the ESRS, the CSRD standard as well, the equivalent of ISSB here. So then you start to see, okay, I can now start to find what they are doing and we can compare with what we are doing here. Are there any differences? And is there something that we actually done better? And even now, we have actually started to look into some of the agriculture companies in the EU, how they actually address some of this sustainability consideration and compare it what the peers are doing in Malaysia. And interesting, I hope there are some good news from there. But let's wait for another year or so to have a full comparison.
Very interesting. I am also looking forward to seeing what that comparison looks like.
Yeah.
I would bet my chips on our industry being at least as good, if not better than most, on most of these metrics, not least because we've been under scrutiny for 20 years, and I think we've had to respond to that. But linked to that, I want to come back to the point Ku had made earlier. And Murni, this is going to be a question to you. Ku mentioned just now the evolving expectations, the push from downstream, from brands, from consumers, to reframe, reset our expectations through new frameworks like regenerative agriculture. Also, I would add to that, shifting consumer expectations around what sustainability means. So you go back 20 years, it was deforestation, it was orangutans, shifted to becoming much more on climate issues, the labor issues that are coming in, the rights issues that are coming in. So understandably, I'm the first to admit sustainability is not one target. It's an evolving conversation. But coming back to the point Ku made just now, how do we deal with the fact that the industry feels like it's constantly being asked to shift the goalposts on these kinds of issues? What's the perspective from you guys who get stuck in the middle between the consumers and the producers?
Yeah, definitely, right? I mean, the consumers do get very excited on what's new, what's trendy at the moment. And then what we've seen also is in terms of regenerative agriculture. I think it is important to hear them, but also in terms of we need to manage that expectations, that this is still very much an area that's still being studied, even on our side. Yes, the pressures are definitely there, but I think it is about making it clear that there are some studies being put around it and then managing it stage by stage. But of course, for them, right, it's more of like the people stories. So in regenerative agriculture, yes, it's about the health of the soil and how you rotate the crops or intercropping, multi-cropping and things like that. But in the end, also, it's like the stories of the farmers. What benefit does it give back to the farmers? And then it goes wider to the community and the industry of the palm oil industry and how it benefits the smallholders or the small and medium plantation workers and things like that. So I think it's more shifting it back to the impact to the people, the human stories, and bringing that out. And then that's where we can try and get that emotion that we want to get and, start including other benefits into it from nutrition point of view and things like that. Yeah.
Now, I think the importance of those human stories is something that we have seen so much in this industry. And I think to the industry's credit, we are getting better at being able to tell that story, to move beyond the perception of the palm industry being these almost faceless big conglomerates, recognizing that these are thousands of workers, thousands of communities, millions of smallholders on the ground, and being able to tell that story of the positive impact that the industry has made on the ground in people's lives. So that, and I know Nestle are quite good at this when you want to be, and we always look forward to working with you more on telling good stories. But I think it's an area that you're right, we do need to draw out a bit more.
Yep.
And
definitely and especially the stories of the farmers, because I think on the ground, especially Malaysian consumers, it's about, okay, it's great that you're doing all these great things globally, but what about us? What about us who's in Malaysia on the ground, struggling, facing all of this climate change impacting with the floods and things like that? So, yeah.
And it's particularly interesting in the Malaysia context, it occurred to me, because the story of the palm industry is so intrinsically intertwined with the developmental history of this country. You go back a couple of generations, the whole massive sort of Felda schemes, the way in which we dealt with poverty by building agriculture, bringing people out of poverty. But it's almost like, macam kita dah lupa, like we've almost forgotten that. And now we think about the palm industry, we think about it as something separate from our daily lives living in KL and stressing more about, traffic jams and anything else. Somehow I think we need to find a way to reclaim that. Cool. Sorry, I was going to come to you, but Farhana jumped in right there, so I don't know whether you wanted to say something on that.
Yeah, so this is something that I had in my mind, that I think we are very good at reporting data and numbers, right? And how do we communicate the impact of palm to Malaysia and Indonesia? It's literally lifting the country from a low-income nation to a middle-income nation, and still propping up when we want to get into a high-income nation. It's a very powerful messaging. And we talk about the cost of deforestation, the cost of climate change and all that. But palm has done very good work in some when it comes to protection of biodiversity. How do we value that? And how do we value the social elements that I have now at least 3 to 4 generations that have been lifted out of poverty? And that itself, I think, is much, much more valuable. And it could be in billions and trillions of dollars when you want to compare with impact of deforestation, in my view. So someone smart from any local universities could, sit down, get a grant, and compute what's the numbers would be like.
All right. Those of you listening in, anybody who's about to write a grant proposal, I suspect Farhana just volunteered to help you come up with something really impactful. But that's also something I want to, forgive the term, put a pin on this one, because I think this question of how we tell that story better and how the impact of the palm industry connects to our developmental history and our sort of economic future is something that we can come back to when we shift later to talking about what do we pull out of this as policy recommendations to government, intergovernmental bodies on how we actually communicate what we're doing better. Before we get to that though, because I really do enjoy provoking your frustration about everything that's wrong with the industry. Izzana had mentioned a couple of times earlier this challenge, I think a couple of others mentioned it as well, of the proliferation of standards. And as a grower, I know basically you see this as an inundation of different reporting requirements. You guys have the mandatory ones like MSPO in Malaysia. You have the RSPO, which is necessary for any company that operates globally. You've got more technical standards like AACC and others. You have a whole gamut of other health and safety regulations you face. You have disclosure requirements from Bursa and from your banks. You've got now reporting requirements around EUDR and others. How do we actually build, as Izzana has asked us, a coherent global narrative around this? And that's a question at two levels. How do we build a narrative that allows you as a company to tell a good story? But also in practical terms, as someone who sits in the governing bodies of many of these institutions, how do we actually bring a bit more coherence, efficiency, alignment into those different systems so it actually makes the lives of our growers and producers easier? Feel free to write.
I would start with the coherence. I think there is this concept of co-petition, which is collaboration and competition, that a lot of stakeholders don't really get, right? So if we were to look at just the national standards and RSPO, for example, there are ample opportunity for us to collaborate when it comes to administrative certification audits, for example, right? So, and then, with your respective certification and the differentiation that you made from your certification, you can go out to the markets and compete on different terms.
Yeah.
So you don't have to compete on all fronts, right? So hopefully if there's, members of the government, members of the industry that's listening in, the industry has been calling out for MSPO and RSPO to have a single audit list, right? Basically, we can get through the audits in 2 days instead of 4 days, and then find other ways of collaborating while you compete, on your differentiated terms when it goes out to the market. So that's one part that I think people need to shift their paradigm and start to think a little bit differently. With regards to the other disclosure, actually, with the IFRS, I'm rather grateful that we have converged on the IFRS, because prior to that it was just a alphabet soup of disclosures. And the good thing coming out of the IFRS is twofold. One is it addresses the issue of sustainability in a much more strategic lens, because it forces you to look at what are the risks and what are the opportunities, right? Rather than looking at it as a box ticking exercise. And precisely because of its strategic nature, the whole of the organization needs to get into it. This is no longer a sustainability department function, but it's also the function of the finance team, the tax team, the procurement team, the operation team, the strategy team. They all need to come together and to try to kind of use sustainability as a strategic value creator. And so I think the approach that we advocate in KLK, which is something that perhaps other organizations can adopt, is that we become the business partners to our different colleagues in the different function, and we constantly show them how is it that we are creating value, and therefore and also applying the pragmatism. So, for example, in the way we create a matrix in terms of which of the GHG emission reduction project that we're going to get onto. You start with the one that gives you the highest reduction in emission and at the lowest cost, where your payback is the fastest. And then you sequence the projects accordingly. So that's the way in which you become strategic. You become the business partner to your colleagues. So I think IFRS, in a way, it's kind of good. It forces the issue, gets you to look at it strategically, forces the whole of organization to get behind it. And then, of course, my earlier message of national and international standards needing to collaborate and compete at the same time. And maybe CPOPC can have a role in kind of pulling people together.
We love that.
I was going to deflect that to CPOPC rather than you hanging around my neck, Ku. But you're right. I mean, and Izzana, you've already made this point, actually, that I think we need to find a way for these different standards, these different initiatives that are ultimately all trying to do the same thing, which is to be able to define, demonstrate, and prove that the industry is operating sustainably. We need to find a way to break through that impasse, that perception gap that says these all have to operate in separate silos, and find a way to bring them together into a more coherent, credible, industry-wide narrative. Maybe ironically, in spite of the tremendous progress the industry's made, one of the things that's held us back is our inability to tell that as one story. Whereas when you look at some of the other commodities that I would argue probably haven't done as much as we have, they're much better at telling a coherent story. So as we get later to talking about what we can bring out of this as recommendations on policy and policy action, maybe that's something we want to pick up on a bit as well. But Izzana, coming back to you again, as you can see, doing a round robin here. I want to shift a little bit to, we've spent 40 minutes now talking about what ails the industry. Let's talk about the good news a little bit. Based on what you've seen and heard of the industry over the very intense few months since you've come on board, what do you think the industry is actually doing well in terms of communicating or in terms of positioning its efforts on the ground? What are the positive things we can build on?
So you're right. It has been an intense few months, and I can say that a large part of what people do respect about the industry these days would be the sustainability frameworks. At all the platforms I have spoken at, listened to, when we talk about MSPO, ISPO, RSPO, they're not just saying acronyms. When you explain on a very high level what are these, that these are voluntary or mandatory national certification frameworks, there's a certain respect that suddenly enters the conversation. Because even though, yes, I think our part of the world really good at data, really good at doing the technical work, and maybe storytelling is, as they say, not our jam just yet. But exactly for that same reason, if I may flip the other side of the coin, that's exactly what they respect. They know that when we talk about the sustainability frameworks, it's something that they really, I do notice that there is a shift in the room. During the World Bank side event that we did, we brought in speakers from an innovation angle, job creation, industry, health, and multilateral platform. And you can tell that as soon as sustainability is spoken about, frameworks are brought up, all the four alphabet acronyms are brought up, there's a certain respect that enters the room. However, there needs to still be some more coordinated communication. We always aim for the best, right? And of course, at CPOPC, we're always looking at how we can bridge this. We understand that certain national certifications play a role within the nation's agenda, but at the same time, not many people are really going, oh, this is Indonesian palm oil, this is Malaysian palm oil. When we talk about palm oil, it's painting a rather broad brush. And so CPOPC is hoping to play a role in that sense, starting with our conversation next week. And we want to promote, and we always, in all our efforts, we promote the visibility of the certification systems. We show the alignment to the global framework, SDGs, Paris Agreement, ESG standards across all the international platforms. And so we want to translate this evidence into advocacy through UN statements, side events, policy briefs, etc., so that they ensure that producing countries' systems are visible and respected as part of the global solutions. So long story short, when we talk about sustainability, there is that salute.
Yeah. Thanks, Izzana. I think the fact that when we speak, we may not be very kind of jazzy in how we do it, but we speak with substance and credibility. That is something we should definitely not lose as we move forward. I'm going to pass on the same question to Farhana and Murni as well. What are you seeing in this industry that we're doing well? Cool. Did you want to jump in now, or should I come to you later?
If I could just quickly chime in on CPOPC's role, and Izzana and I had this conversation for a while now, right? And the 2 points that I feel CPOPC really have an opportunity to do very well is, number one, build alliances. And perhaps these alliances has got to go beyond the producing countries to include alliances of countries that are within the supply chain as well. Because that's when you connect the producers with the people who actually use it or people who benefit from it. And case in point that I've made quite strongly is Singapore should be part of CPOPC because they benefit from the trade, whether it is, the professional services, the legal services, the finance, the transactional, the banking, and all of that. So they should come in and, kind of use their typical Singapore pragmatic hat, that avoids all these dogmas and all that, right? And I particularly like one of the minister, Chee Hong Tat, right? And who addressed the issue of SAF by saying that we should be guided by science and evidence and not by, what do you call unsolicited dogma, right?
Yeah.
So I think we need that practical head, for the other countries to also start coming in. That building that strong alliance and a bigger alliance is very important. And then of course the next piece is the advocacy, which I believe Izzana, from the sound of it, is already doing a lot of. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, Ku. And to be fair, Ku and I had this conversation all the way in May before I even joined. So thanks, Ku, for the feedback. Always open to listening to industry, what we can do better.
Thanks. Farhana, just before I come to you, to the audience, I know we seem to be having a wonderful conversation amongst ourselves, but we do also welcome questions from all of you. I see a couple popping up in the chat box in the Q&A already, and I'll come to them in just a minute. But quickly, I think before we move on, Farhana, on that question of positive stories, what are we doing? You guys work with so many players in the industry. What are you seeing that we should build on more of?
One thing that really stood out for me when I work with palm players, I know we say we should communicate better, we should, collaborate more, but actually you are collaborating quite a lot. And this is one industry, and I've had experience working with many different industries. This is one industry where there are community, like a real community around it. And you can see the big players are talking to each other. And when they need to share certain information and experience, people are more open to actually do the sharing. And we are not really closed off like, oh, this is my proprietary information, I don't want to share it. But a lot of it really that, oh, I'm having these difficulties, everyone understands where everyone is. So that's a very good foundation, I think, for the industry that I have not seen across others. So how then do we leverage that and really come up with a very cohesive story about positive things about the palm industry? And the second thing is that it's actually I wasn't aware, but it wasn't communicated well enough to the public that it's a very efficient fruit. And you can get so many things out of it. The waste is actually very, very minimal. So how that to be, that is actually a very good story. How that to be communicated and when compared with other crops, that's actually a very interesting thing to see as well.
Thanks, Farhana. While I have you, there was a question in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee, which was about how financial institutions can drive growth in the palm oil sector through productivity and value chain expansion rather than traditional land expansion. That's basically one of the realities the industry faces. We can no longer continue to grow production by opening up vast new areas of land.
Yep.
At the same time, we are facing a productivity crisis, we're facing an output crisis. So the interesting question here was what financial institutions can do to drive that. Any recommendations from your side?
Yeah, so we had this discussion, right? Where are the growth right now? That we can't explore further land, right? You can't deforest anymore. But I do think there are some efficiencies based on our discussion is that, number one, within the organization itself, what kind of precision farming that we can consider as part of it. How do we work effectively in terms of managing our headcount costs, our labor costs? That's one area. But I think there's a lot of opportunities that the FIs can work with the palm players. There's a lot of smallholders. How do we optimize these smallholders? They have a very different operation because of numbers. How then we get their practices to be a bit more efficient? Because I do think there's a lot of opportunities that we can explore. And then, it is a matter of how FIs then fund this investment rather than looking into the traditional expansion of I'm buying things or I'm putting up more plants, but finding efficiencies. That would be an interesting story.
Cool. On this question of expanding, productivity, increasing productivity and the value chain, if I flip the question around, and we have no bankers on the call here, so I'm not putting Farhana on the spot, what would you be asking the financial institutions to do? What role can they play from the point of view of growers like you to help push this kind of productivity and value chain expansion?
I think the answer is more wide-ranging because not only are the financial institutions kind of providing the support that is very important for the upstream which is the production side of it, but it is also in the downstream as well. So case in point is we get a lot of support from FIs in terms of our GHG emission reduction. So we get attractive financial terms for us to meet our GHG emission targets. And that kind of really drives you to think very innovatively, right? No longer is it just enough to look at kind of like production of biogas from pome, but I think more and more the movement from pome to biomethane, which can be used circularly in your own operations, or it could be exported, is getting a lot of momentum. So I think the FIs are doing the bit, and I think the industries are appreciative of it. One other thing that financially that needs to be looked at is governments could take a more kind of holistic look at what's happening in the industry. So case in point in Malaysia is where we have age profile that is really kind of deteriorating. And yields per hectare has gone down, I think on a national basis is probably at around 15 plus 16 tons a hectare right now. It used to be 2 to 3 tons a lot, more. And this is a combination of aging profiles, infestation of Ganoderma and all that. So what the industry needs is replanting, right? With better planting materials, higher yields, more Ganoderma resistant, and also, improving on the age profile. But the industry isn't getting the same treatment as what the manufacturing industry will get. So I'm coming to this thing called reinvestment allowance, right? So if you look at the palm as a machine, quote unquote, after 20, 25 years, the machine needs a renewal, right? And in the manufacturing industry, your machine, your equipment gets changed and you get a reinvestment allowance, but the palm industry gets nothing from it. And this is not very smart, because what's happening then is that the yield will get worse, which means that the tax that is payable to the government gets worse, right? Then you're going going around in circles in terms of we're not getting enough income, and more cess collection needs to be done and all that. But that's missing the forest from the tree. So I hope MOF is listening, because we've made this plea for many, many years, because this is the larger picture. Help the industry to re-equip. Look at palm as equipment. It's a biological plant, but it is also an equipment at the same time.
We are, I think, coming to the point where we start shifting the conversation. Did I just raise my hand? Very much into that question of, all right, what can we take out of this as ideas, suggestions, recommendations for the policy space? Because the idea of these CGM roundtables is very much to distill actionable policy recommendations that we and our community can take back to policymakers in places like MOF. So there are a number that have come up already. There's also a question that came up in the Q&A box, which I may need to reframe a little bit. I think you can see it, about having met reps from the industry many years ago, Dr. Murad Hashim, Tan Sri Augustine Ong, who talked about the very impressive research capacity, thought leadership capacity we have in the industry, and whether we still have that today, whether we need to do more of that. So maybe on this one, I might go backwards and start with Ku and see what's your view of this from the industry's point of view. Do we still have that strong backbone of research and technical excellence we can build on, or should we be doing differently in that space as well?
I think the backbone of the research is still there, right? But over the years, maybe we have gotten too enamored with maybe the phytonutrients, right? And we've been talking a lot about carotenes and tocotrienol, which is fantastic, right? It could go into skincare, it can go into functional foods and all that. But I think it's time that we come back to the core and talk about the health of the oil itself, which I think has gone a little bit quiet. So I think that core kind of body of research is still there. That is the point that on the communication fronts can be picked up. The health of the oil. We heard a lot about the so-called health or otherwise of seed oil. But again, that is a battle that it's best left to our competitors to deal with. But certainly, palm oil is as healthy as olive, right? In many instances, and it has a lot of functional superiority. And that's something that we need to drive home over and beyond just the phytonutrients.
Yeah, thanks. Also, quick shout out to Azani Nordin. You dropped a comment in the chat around economic and bottom line priorities. Could you maybe frame that as a question in the Q&A, and I'll try and pick up on it. I'm not quite sure what you meant on that one. So if you'd like to, just drop a question in the Q&A, the box is at the bottom, and we'll try and pick up on that a little bit more as well. So on this question of what do we take to policymaking, just going back over our conversation earlier, we talked about the developmental story in Malaysia, the role that palm has played and continues to play as a key driver of our economy. And Ku, I think immediately that also then connects to the point you made about fiscal policy. If it is such a major driver of our economy, and particularly of our rural economies, should we be better aligning our fiscal incentives to support the industry moving forward? We also talked about the opportunity for collaborative competition amongst systems and standards. How do we actually create a space where we're leveraging off each other, sort of building more friendly competition to be able to move forward in the spaces that we really need to invest in? And that's something maybe we can try and delve into a little bit more on the policy side as well. And then you talked about the shifting of the narrative to focus more on the health of the oil, the efficiency of the oil. I think, Farhana, you made the point as well about this being such an efficient crop, and maybe we need to do more at the policy level to make that case. But as we move into this question of what would we like to see from policymakers, what else is on your mind? And maybe, Murni, I might start with you from your side. Given you guys work in the complex consumer space, what do you think policymakers can do to actually help us strengthen this story?
For me, policymakers, I mean, I think you mentioned it just now, right? This healthy competition or collaboration in this case. So allowing for that to happen, that giving that space where we can work together to send one cohesive message on the collective efforts that we have all done together, maybe separately, but in one story and one platform. So having that alliance and being able to tell that story together is actually very important. And being able to build on that across the industries, our competitors, and my own competitors as well. And forming that alliance is actually something that I would like to look forward to, and being able to communicate that as well. I mean, I think some changes have already been made. There are some positive stories that was mentioned before. I missed some of them because I think my connection was quite bad. So there are some improvements, definitely. And yeah, so like it's more of communicating this and also allowing for that direct consumer engagement in some cases for them to see that real impact that's happening with the choices that they are making.
Yeah. Thanks. Other thoughts around policy? Cool. I think in one of our earlier conversations, you made the distinction between sort of hard policy, the kind of regulations, laws that governments can put in place, and the role that policymakers can play on the softer side, encouraging coordination, as you mentioned just now, among schemes and others. If there was anything on the hard policy side, and again, don't forget, we're not just talking Malaysia here, we're talking perhaps also regulations and policies that could be done better at the downstream in the consumer markets. What comes to mind from your side?
I think hard policies are spaces that are going to play out in our respective national borders, right? So certainly, I think if you look at producing country, the policies are not going to be similar, right? Because they have different agendas and they have different priorities. But I think what we can certainly do is to have a convening of like-minded public sector and private sector people to say, okay, what are the key kind of collaborative message that needs to go out that will create a larger pie that all of us get benefit from. So it's going to be a question of who has that convening power or that convening influence, right? It's got to be more multinational or cross-border. And at the same time, being able to pull in all the relevant kind of actors to and gather them and to be able to kind of dissect into somewhat a very cohesive way forward and the messaging behind it. So yeah, I mean, it could be a job for CPOPC, you know, Izzana. So
I had
I
a
don't
feeling that was
know.
coming my way.
Kind of
Yeah, but
sounded like he was pointing in that direction, Izzana.
yeah. But if CPOPC picks up the challenge, you know, you can be assured that we will be behind you.
Thanks, Ku. That means a lot to us. If I may jump in, JD.
Yes, of course. I was about to call on you. Yes.
Yes. So I'd agree with Ku, even if I wasn't representing CPOPC in this call, there is a need to have a central messaging, because communicating about sustainability today is not about defending palm oil, but it's about owning our progress and telling it in, as I mentioned earlier, a compounded manner. And the reason why, for me, this is a really big agenda in CPOPC is just over this last 1 week, I sat down and had 2 conversations, and these were personal conversations with 2, I would say, hostile parties. And so one was in the US, executive director of one of the European countries at a multilateral institution. And after we were done, his comment was, I'm really glad that we are having this hard conversation and there's no shying away around the realities and also the progress of the industry. So I was actually waiting to get some criticisms after we were done, but actually he said that. And the next being just yesterday with a senior reporter within the agriculture space. But that person had focused a lot more on rapeseed oil. But when we spoke about, as I think Farhana mentioned earlier, about how efficient of a crop this is in so many ways, not just in climate management, but in land usage. And then we talk about food security. You want to talk about how, of course, there's a food versus fuel conversation, but you want to talk about in 2050, there's 10 billion mouths to feed. In 2050, there's also 20 billion global air traffic passengers that we're expecting. So palm oil's efficiency is really unmatched. And when we pushed the data to a senior reporter, at the end of that conversation, she said, "Oh, you've actually changed my mind about palm oil." And so actually getting the messaging out there in a concerted, compounded manner, in a very loud way, would be the mission moving forward. And of course, that starts with convening, as Ku said, the private and public sector. But together, getting a single messaging out there is, I think, a really important part. Because at the end of the day, our progress really only matters when it's understood. And that requires one story that's told consistently.
Murni, I
Yeah, I
see
would
you going to
just
jump
love
in.
to build on that. Thanks so much,
Please.
Izzana, because we also had this conversation as well with I'll lower my hand first. Okay, with someone from Switzerland as well. And when we were saying, oh, we're doing this, we're going underground, we have this, all of these different initiatives, and they were shocked. They're like, oh, you must be spending so much on this. Why do you do it? And then we look back at them like, why do you think we do it? Because it's important. It's, the impact on the ground. And I think this is exactly it, that one message that goes out. But I think the frequency of it and the recency of it, because this is something that sometimes, with the sexiness of new conversations coming up, new trends that are coming up, they forget. And I think that kind of frequency is required to send that message to the right people, but also to the consumers themselves via the media houses or through social media. That's very important. Thank you.
So I like the idea that's forming here, but I also want to throw in a question that's come in from the audience, which is about lobbying. And for those of you who can't see it, it says lobbying was a popular part of a PR strategy in certain industries, palm oil, oil and gas, aviation sectors. Do we need to train a new generation of lobbyists for this sector? Do we still hire lobbyists? And I throw this at you, which for me is a bit of a loaded question. Is that what we need, more lobbyists? Or do we need a different way of being able to tell the story better? Ku, what do you think? Oh, I can't hear you at the moment, Ku.
Sorry, I was muted. I wouldn't call it lobbying. I would rather call it advocacy, because it does a couple of
Yeah.
things. Number one, it brings out information, deliver the information when it was not in existence to begin with. And number two, it addresses misconceptions by putting out the truth, and the facts of it. So I think it's about establishing mutual understanding, and lobbying seems to give a kind of a bad kind of a stigma to it, but really it's about advocacy. Maybe Izzana would have another view as well.
Actually, I'd echo your view. Lobbying does have that connotation, but advocacy has a lot more of a connection with the stakeholders, a lot more pushing out of current data, data's facts, data. So I'd actually agree with you on that, Ku.
So, question to all of you, and anyone who wants to respond on this, feel free to jump in because it might be a little bit dicey. In my experience, and I say this from outside the palm sector, governments can certainly throw a lot of money at advocacy, PR campaigns, media outreach and others. But governments aren't always the best actors to frame a compelling message. Just because, and having worked in large bureaucracies, I can say this, once you get a message through multiple layers of bureaucracies and committees, it tends to lose a lot of that authenticity and relevance and timeliness. So from a government point of view, what's the way in which government can play a more positive role? I mean, should they be supporting advocacy efforts by industry players and others? Should they be sort of working together more directly with media influencers, without criticizing the tremendous efforts our governments have made over the last 20 years? From your points of view, what do you think we can actually take to them as suggestions on how to do better? Nobody wants to touch this one.
Difficult question, but maybe
Yeah.
let me take a step. I think governments are probably very good when it comes to policy development, facilitation, and all that. But like you rightly pointed out, some functions are better left to the industry leaders, right? And certainly, I think communication and advocacy could be one of those. Provide the funding, provide the kind of support behind it, and let the industry do it. And to make it the analogy, case in point, right? I mean, the industry has been trying to mechanize and automate for such a long time. And, when you put that exercise into a bit of a bureaucracy, it takes a long time for it to come to fruition. And so, if there's a way where the government say, okay, I am not the most agile, because the government cannot be agile. I leave this to the private sector. I give you the funding within a certain framework, and I hold you accountable for it. And if you fail, then you get no more support or funding from it, and let the industry run with it. And I'm quite sure it will take off in no time, right? So, for example, the use of AI and robotics possibly in the upstream, right, in the farms, right? I could see humanoids being deployed, but because the cost has really come down. A basic unit tree is $5,900, and robotic manufacturers are all over China. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to let the private sector take the lead, collaborate with the Chinese partner, demonstrate what it can be done on the field, and the government basically just hold the private sector accountable for whatever support and funding that's given to them. But within certain means of allowing certain things to fail because you have experimenting. So the same can take place in communications, right? I convene, I facilitate, I support you with funding, right? As long as you stay within this framework, you go out and get the job done, because we're not agile enough to do it. It's a conversation that needs to take place. It's not going to be an easy conversation, because government being governments, I think the ability to let go of control and understanding that when you let go of control, better things can happen is not an easy message to get across.
I'm going to toss Murni in the middle of this one, because I would argue if we're going to tell a compelling story about the contribution, the positive impact of this industry, we definitely need to get the brands behind this as well. So what do you think of the idea that Ku had put forward about government actually kind of stepping back and partnering with industry to tell this story?
I think, especially because we're a palm oil producing country, right? So I think it is beneficial, this public-private partnerships, together with the industry. Of course, funding is required as well, but that kind of partnership and seeing how we can collaborate together to tell that story through various platforms, even through our packaging, for that matter, because a lot for Nestle Malaysia, wait, how many percent? Most of our products actually are made in Malaysia. And using palm oil as well in many of our products as well. So there's a lot of leverage that they could gain from partnering with an entity like Nestle, or even, with the palm oil sectors, the palm oil producers. So I think this is definitely a great idea moving forward. And I think, but I guess that also, what is the benefit as well, the collective benefit, the funding, and perhaps maybe we can get into some tax discussions, tax incentives, to try and move forward on this, because we have progressed so much, especially in Malaysia and some of the key palm oil producing countries, and it is beneficial to talk about this.
Yeah. The tax incentive conversation is something I think we'll definitely come to. And Ku, as you said, it's almost a pity there's nobody from MOF on the call, but we can certainly summarize a lot of this for our follow-up conversations. This idea of government continuing to support, but shifting its approach to something that's maybe a bit more agile, a bit more market-focused. How can we also look at that in the context of other support to the industry? For instance, Ku, I think Farhana, you know this as well. The government actually puts a lot of resources into supporting the industry, whether it's support the smallholders, whether it's agriculture extension services and others. Are there also opportunities there where we think the government could maybe tune their efforts to be a little bit more effective? Farhana?
Yeah. So I think a lot of, you're right in the way that there has been quite a lot of grants, benefits, supports given by the palm players, especially the smallholders here in Malaysia. But if you ask me, a lot of the things that government can do is, in this current space, is really encourage cross-industry collaboration. I think someone earlier mentioned about the sustainable aviation fuel, and it is going to be a big thing if some of the shipping industry and the aviation industry wants to move towards that. We have the access here in Malaysia, right? How then the government can help to actually enable our methane products to be part of the solutions for sustainable aviation fuel, for example. And I think this is an area where only the government and cross-country and cross-industries can actually push. And the thing about messaging and communication by the government, and I think the public, normal people like you and me, we would not like it if if the propaganda is way too in your face. So then how do we do it in a way that is subtle, and you feel that, oh, this is like a shift in mindset of how we view the product itself. It's interesting that over the past 5 years, you see plant-based milk, for example, were favored during the pandemic. And then over the past year, we start to see about noises about oat milk is not as good as before. So I'm always curious how this sentiment around the world and for the consumers actually move. Is there some hands behind it, or is just a natural of how, as we get more information, we make a bit more better decision as a consumer?
Now, that's a very interesting question, which I don't want to go into too much because I have my own views about how sentiment gets shaped in this area. I would maybe go as far as saying that that's definitely something that we are not very good at as an industry. And coming back to the point, Ku, about supporting communications, I do believe, and I hope you agree with me, that that's something that we should look at as an industry overall and not just dump on the palm oil producers and growers to do. Because sometimes, that could be the toughest proponent to sell this. Cool, yes.
Yeah. So I think on Farhana's point, what is very critical is to get the messaging land on a couple of messaging that are really important. Then the second part of it is your channel of communication. And today we are looking at a scene that is very different from even just 5 years ago, right? This is very algorithm dominated channel management. Whereas in the past, we were working with more traditional channels. So now you have bots and algorithms coming into play. So getting your content right and then getting your channel strategy right, and the combination of that will be quite powerful. But again, like Joseph said, I think we do need to convene across the industry. It's not just producers, but also the midstream, the downstream players coming together to agree that these are the messages and these are the channel strategies that we're going to take.
Yeah. So moving beyond the communications part, which I think was the purpose of this conversation, but we've touched quite well. Given an opportunity, we will send Izzana as our representative here. What message would you want to convey to our policymakers in this country about how their support to the industry can be more effective? We've talked about the better communications, about a more coherent narrative, about encouraging and pushing for alignment across the standards and the different sustainability schemes. We've talked about fiscal incentives for replanting, reinvestment allowances, possibly also directing some of the money that's put into communications advocacy to partnering with downstream industry, including the tax credits that Murni's asked for, which I'm sure that she will now get. Beyond that, and I would say, especially if you look beyond the primary commodities ministry or the finance ministry, what else can our government actually do? And let me ask a specific question, because Izzana, you've been engaging a lot now on the climate scene globally, with the COP, with the UN system, with the World Bank. Is there a way in which we can better craft our narrative in that context of the global efforts on climate change? Farhana, you made the point earlier about the efficiency of this crop as a way of producing palm oil. So if you had the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, who also happens to be the Ministry of Commodities, in the room with us, what suggestions would you make to him as for how the government could tell a better story? Murni, you're nodding intently. Did you want to say something?
No, I'll wait. I'll let Izzana go first.
I'm very happy for you to take that on. First, I was just mulling my 3 a.m. brain here.
I know.
So, and if I may be so candid, JD, I think when our government puts their mind to something, they can really make a change. We see that with the acknowledgement from the EU about a month ago on MSPO. That was concerted effort, very strategic effort, and great coming together of industry led by very strong and right political will. So talking about some of the other sustainable aviation fuel, marine biofuel conversation, I think what we've seen in this last week is that maybe the intent is not there yet. Because what we've seen when there is intent, they go all in. And that's purely from a Malaysian perspective. I am unable to, because at CPOPC, when we speak, we have to represent all our member countries. And here I see it, there's a divergent in where the countries want to go. We do engage with a lot of the diplomatic corps when we travel, because that is part of our charter, our responsibilities. And where CPOPC's line is drawn is when there's huge differences between national agenda on some of these topics. So as Switzerland in this Council of Growers, I do have to do a lot of stakeholder engagement. So in this conversation, I do see a bit of divergence. But for Malaysia, I think they're still regrouping. There's a lot of conversation happening internally still with IMO, for example. And I know there's a lot of bid to re-enter the council, but I think once there's that political will and that interest taking place internally within our government, we have seen it happen. Yeah. They go all in and they do achieve success. And so with that, as a council where we represent multiple countries, I do wish the different governments all the best.
Thank you. And Izzana, huge credit for still being so coherent at 3 a.m. in London.
I really hope I was coherent there.
No,
yes.
2 thumbs up.
Yes.
Murni,
thumbs
go
up.
for it.
Yes, so I would like to build because I understand the limitations of what Izzana can say based on her position. I think I'm coming more from the Malaysia standpoint and what I have personally been involved with MSPO, of course, and also with the Ministry of Plantation and Commodities and NRES as well. So I think the intent is there. The push is also there. I think he has, from what I've observed, he has been engaging or mentoring a lot more to MSPO and in creating this impact alliance. So at least we have this cross industry effort and alliance to move the needle forward. And I do see, it's still in its infancy. There's still some ways to go, but he, for Malaysia specifically, he has also mentioned that, how he wants to attract the buyers of Malaysian palm oil to the world. And then perhaps, and I have to quote this, he's mentioned it earlier this year about, if you want sustainable palm oil, you come to Malaysia. If you want cheap palm oil, you can go anywhere else. So I think he is, and they are going on the right direction and using MSPO as a way to get there. Of course, there are gaps that needs to be closed. And that's why this Impact Alliance has been formed to try and close the gaps with the different founding members. Yeah.
I think the Impact Alliance is a very important shift because there's a change in the government mindset and paradigm from one where MSPO started as a very top-down. This is what the government wants you, the industry, to do too. This is the government that wants to listen to how you can collectively come together and decide what is good for the industry. That's a good shift. So if we take the lead from there and we develop, a way forward through the Impact Alliance, then we can also identify where we could collaborate with RSPO, with ISPO, with the Indonesian government. And there are many, many areas where we could just simply collaborate. So case in point, palm oil industry as a carbon sequester. I think the potential is there, but we've never really kind of scientifically really proved it properly with the right technologies. And with IoT and AI and all of that, this is very, very possible. Number two, SAF, right? I think Izzana has spoken about SAF. If the Western world does not want palm waste SAF, ASEAN could take the lead. You got Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, the three largest producer. We have a lot of palm waste to start with. You got Singapore, Suvarnabhumi in Bangkok. These are all the major hubs. And if Indonesia, even if Indonesia itself were just to adopt it, the amount of flights that are domestically available in Indonesia to take up this SAF will help to bring the SAF production cost down quite simply because the volume can go up. So I think we can start in our own backyard. We don't have to wait for the Europeans or the Americans to say, okay, we accept palm waste as an ingredient on the coast here. We could start it ourselves.
Yeah. To be fair, if I may just jump in on that SAF conversation, what I realize is that I think the knowledge was not there. There's not enough advocacy in that space to get messaging across, because once the information was out there and put it in a very systematic and palatable manner, the acceptance was quite prevalent. And there was even another panelist who said, actually, it makes sense. At the end of the day, it's about the supply of feedstock, There's a limited supply, and why we're talking about progress. We're not talking about perfection at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think with the ASEAN summit, I was hoping something more will come out of it. We could certainly do with ASEAN SAF policy, right? With Malaysia in the chair, but it looks like it's not going to happen, but doesn't mean that it cannot happen in the future.
It's cool. You got 4 more days to make that happen. No worries. Guys, I'm conscious of time. We're down to the last 6-7 minutes. So I'm going to quickly try and draw together some of the things I heard that we can take out that's of policy relevance. Then I'm going to close the bang by asking the 4 of you one final question, which is, beyond what I summarize in a moment, if there's one thing you want people to take away from our conversation today, what would that be? So think about that. We were really trying to bring this together into a set of ideas that we, through CGM, could take to government, to policymakers around how we can do better to support this industry, how we can do better to support the sustainability efforts the industry's been making. A number of things have jumped out. On the communication side, a very strong sense that we need a more coherent narrative. We need one narrative. And we need that to be a narrative that is built around impact and the human story. We have a lot of data, we have a lot of performance metrics, we've used that for years, but we maybe need to frame our efforts more coherently in that space, and ideally move towards Ku's aspiration of us having the got milk equivalent for the palm industry at some point. Number two, around the fiscal space, both in supporting the industry with reinvestment allowances and others, but also maybe moving towards smart partnerships with the entire supply chain to support the industry, picking up on Murni's point. And I would maybe, if you permit me, extend that beyond, tax incentives for collaboration or communications, but also on a lot of the really good work the midstream and downstream do to support the industry, the work you guys do on supporting smallholders and sustainability efforts, etc. So can we bring that into more of a smart partnership? On the external advocacy and positioning, I think given Izzana's position as the Switzerland of the industry, a stronger support to help make sure there's coherence across these countries, and the point about looking to see whether there's space in that alliance of palm oil growing countries to also bring in key midstream partners like Singapore, whether there's a willingness and acceptance there to see that being part of the evolution of our regional positioning on this. Lots of other smaller bits I'll pick up on, but I think those are the key things I distilled out of this conversation in terms of a message we could have as a debrief maybe with government coming out of this conversation. But then let me, in the last 5 minutes, turn over to each of you in turn, starting again from Izzana, and say, all right, beyond this, one key takeaway point. What do you want all of us to remember? Oh, you're on mute still, Izzana, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Very simply, I might have already mentioned this earlier, but for me, progress only matters when it's understood. It's as simple as that.
Nice. Farhana.
Yeah. I know we tend to take things negatively, it's always a bad thing, but there's a lot of positive things that we can really look forward to. There's a lot of opportunities in the industry, so it's really for us to go and grab it.
Nice. Murni?
For me, collective action is essential for credible sector-wide transformation.
Nice. Cool. Final word from your side, sir.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, collaborate, and then find ways of competing.
That sounds like a wonderful point on which to wrap up. We are 3 minutes away from the end, but I think in deference to those of us who probably need a bit of sleep at this point, I'm very happy to wrap up. Colleagues, thank you so much. I knew coming into this that this would be not only an easy task, but also a pleasure to have this conversation. You've really made it very interesting, very interactive. I hope it has been as much fun for our attendees as it was for me, and I'm sure it was. We will pull out of this a synthesis, particularly focusing on the things we talked about that we could maybe offer to policymakers as ideas and suggestions from the CGM side. Really appreciate your time. Izzana from London, Murni from, I believe, Red Crescent at the moment,
Yes.
doing volunteer work. Farhana at home from Ku and myself as well. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today. A real pleasure, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye,
Good
everyone.
night.
Good night.
Good afternoon.